Hello and welcome everybody to this session here in the context of our spiritual formation class. I'll be sharing from this PowerPoint here to talk about our postmodern context. And so this is part of helping you prepare for thinking about missions in the 21st century, maybe also in view of your final paper where you will formulate a theology of spiritual formation for your context, for the current day and age that we live in. So I have the title here, The Times They Are Changing Spiritual Formation in the Context of Postmodernism. So let's dive right into that. The overview here, what I will be talking about is different megatrends. So the first one will be the megatrend of urbanization. The second one will be the megatrend of technology. And the third one will be the megatrend of demographics. So these are all major trends that are influencing the world that we live in today. But first, let's talk about how did we get here? So why do we even use the term postmodernism? So one way to look at it is chronologically or historically. Sometimes history is divided in major periods in the Western tradition, often in three major periods, such as antiquity. So that would be the ancient Greeks and the Romans, and then the Middle Ages around the year 1000, and then modernity that started with the Age of Discovery, but especially also the Enlightenment some 200 years ago. And then, of course, after all of this, after modernity came post-modernity, as in after modernity, sometimes also called late modernity, because it's not a completely new age in the sense that a lot of the convictions that came out of modernity, for example, the reliance on science and technology, continue to be dominant today in the postmodern age. But what is characteristic of the postmodern age is, for example, that meta-narratives are rejected, that there's an increasing emphasis on voices from the margins, and that truth becomes personalized and fragmented, which of course is a challenge for us as Christians, because we believe that the story of the Bible is a valid meta-narrative, and we also believe that truth is absolute, both in terms of explaining what the universe is all about and what history is all about, and also in terms of moral claims. Now, I understand this is very brief, what I've told you here, and if you want to read more on postmodernity, you may want to look at this book by J.P. Moreland, Kingdom Triangle: Recover the Christian Mind, Renovate the Soul, Restore the Spirit's Power. So this is what this book looks like, and he has like a whole chapter on postmodernism, so you may want to have a look at that. Then back to our megatrends, and starting with the megatrend of urbanization. So the megatrend number one that I want to highlight here in this discussion is urbanization, and the fact that the year 2009 was a turning point in human history. Since then, for the first time, more people live in urban than in rural areas. So this is a very radical shift if you think about it, because throughout human history, most people have lived in villages basically, right, and have been farmers. And this has only recently changed. It changed first in many of the Western countries, but now this is a global phenomenon. If you include all of Africa, Latin America, all of Asia, all of the Western countries, you have more people living in urban rather than in rural areas. And that also leads to new phenomena such as mega cities, cities with more than 10 million people, right? It used to be, if the city had more than 1 million people, that we talked about a large city. Now we also have cities with more than 10 million people. It also leads to a phenomenon that cities with over 1 million people become quite common in some countries. So China, for instance, has over 160 cities with a population of over 1 million people. That's quite incredible if you think about it, which also means a lot of those cities you and I would probably never have heard of, right? While in a Western country, like in Germany, for example, we have Berlin as a city with more than 1 million people, and then Munich and Hamburg, and those are like the 3 major cities, and everybody in Europe has probably heard of those cities. In China, there might be a whole different situation, and you can read more about this on this website, worldpopulationreview.com. And another phenomenon of our time is that there are certain cosmopolitan cities that become the centers of power of a globalized culture, meaning some of the divides that we're seeing in society are between people who live in big cities and people who live in more rural areas, while the people who live in those cities might have quite a lot in common with people who live in other cities, right? Even if they are in a different country. So you know, certain global elites, let's say in the consulting industry, in banking, in finance, working for multinationals, right? Whether they live in Rio de Janeiro or in San Francisco or in Peking or in Mumbai, they might have certain things in common. And certainly the culture in terms of the movies that are coming out, in terms of the media, the universities, those kind of influences, they are usually found in those important cities in the country rather than in rural areas. So here we have a forecast of what some of the largest cities in the world may be in terms of population by the year 2035. So again, many of the traditionally large cities that we think of would be Western cities, right? Like London and New York, and then more recently, Tokyo in Japan. But going forward, a lot of the largest cities will be in the developing world or in the global south. So for example, the largest city possibly with over 40 million people, 43 million people, could be Delhi in India, and then followed by Tokyo, Japan. And then we've got Shanghai, China, with 34 million people, Dhaka, Bangladesh, Cairo, Egypt, Bombay, India, Kinshasa in Congo, Mexico City in Mexico with 25 million people, Beijing in China, Sao Paulo in Brazil, Lagos in Nigeria, Karachi in Pakistan. So as a developed country, we do have Tokyo or Japan, with Tokyo as its largest city here on this list. But if you look for Western cities, they are all gone, right? It's all countries in Asia, especially, and also in Africa and the Middle East and in South America. So this is one way, or in Latin America, this is one way of how our world is changing. Then another mega trend that describes how our world is changing is technology. Of course, there's a lot to say about that, but one way to describe it, some people speak of several industrial revolutions, right? There's the initial industrial revolution that came out of England in the 18th century. And then in the 19th century, we had new developments like electricity that led to further changes. And then in the middle of the 20th century, after the 1950s, we had the development of computers that is called the third industrial revolution. And now, at the beginning of the 21st century, it looks like we are on the cusp of a new industrial revolution that's then called the fourth industrial revolution. And that is characterized by novel technologies such as artificial intelligence, AI, advanced robotics, 3D printing, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, and biotechnology. And then my third mega trend that I want to highlight is demographics. So if we look at the world population in general, of course, it's still growing. And that's one reason why we have these mega cities developing and these many cities with over 1 million people, for example, in China. But if you look at the total fertility rate by region until now in the last few decades, and again with the projection towards the future, towards the year 2050, and in this graph even to the year 2100, what we see is that fertility rates are going down all over the world, right? So that purple line, sub-Saharan Africa has still high fertility rates, and of course Western areas like this reddish pink line here, Europe and North America, is already low and will continue to be low around 2. And usually you need a fertility rate over 2 children per woman, right, in order to have a growing population. So what that tells us that it looks like many regions certainly Europe and North America, Australia and New Zealand, but also Latin America and the Caribbean, and also parts of Asia, they will not really be growing fast in terms of population. So over the decades to come, it looks like that in a lot of regions, it will go down towards 2 women per child, which basically means stagnation of population, which means there will be fewer young people or younger people, relatively speaking, and more older people in many parts of the world. And certainly that is something we already see in the Western world, but we also see it in countries like China, for example, where the population is aging rapidly. And so that brings me to my conclusion. So on the one hand, what we are observing in the postmodern context in the 21st century that we live in is that most people are living in cities. That's a factual reality. Technology shapes all of life. And also a third mega trend, aging populations are becoming the norm. And so I think it's important for us as Christians to think about what that means, right? What that means for us, for our witness, for the work of the church. And so I want to say here, these are trends on the one hand, but on the other hand, related to these trends, I want to say, yes, we have the trend of urbanization, but people may also long for nature, for the countryside, right? To have a more pure experience of God's creation. Maybe that is something that the church can offer or point people to. Then regarding the mega trend of technology, yes, because of our smartphones, technology is always with us, but people may need a break, like a Sabbath from technology. And that is also something that we as Christians can suggest, right? To challenge people to not make technology an idol, but rather just a tool, and to acknowledge that there are more important things in our lives than the internet or the smartphone or whatever it may be. And then regarding the last trend of an aging population, yes, it's true that the populations, especially Western countries and in countries like the United States, population is not growing rapidly, but growth may come through immigration from certain parts of the world, right? And that's one reason why actually the population in the United States is more dynamic compared to Western Europe, for example, or Eastern Europe, because in the United States, there is more immigration, whether that's from Latin America or from other parts of the world. And so that also means that the demographics are changing, right? The United States is moving towards becoming a majority minority country, and that will continue to be a trend simply because a lot of European Americans, just like Europeans in Europe, don't have that many children, and the population growth comes from other areas, comes through immigration, and that is changing what the country looks like and also what the church looks like. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. I wish you all the best as you continue with this class now that we've done our intensive together last week. So now the time of study is mostly again by yourselves, and a lot of it, as you can see on Populi, will be reading and starting to write, make the assignments, whether that's the book review or your personal and ministry bio, or then the research paper. So that will really be the focus, of course, in the coming weeks. And even though we are not meeting in person at class, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, because I look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I also am stopping the sharing, and I'll stop the recording, and I hope to see you down the road in some occasion. God bless you.